everyone. Welcome back to Shadows of Progress. I'm Riya. This show is basically where I talk to people who are shaping the future and I ask them a slightly uncomfortable question. As progress speeds up, who's getting left behind? And today's episode is one I've been wanting to do for a long time because the entertainment industry is changing faster than actors, writers, and creators can breathe. So I'm talking to someone right at the center of that talent universe. Vivek Kamath, co-founder of India's largest talent agency, Matrix Entertainment. We're going to look at how the screen is getting brighter, but the shadows around it are getting bigger. Thank you for joining me today, Vivek.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So let's start with streaming. It completely rewired the industry. Minute by minute watch data, drop-off points, heat maps, everything's becoming a metric now. So do you ever worry that when storytelling bends too much towards analytics, we lose the messy, human, and unpredictable parts of art? And
So, one of the first things that people thought streaming would displace is theatrical, right? That if it's so convenient to watch movies at home or in transit on devices, will people continue going to the theaters? And yes, to some extent, a certain kind of films may have been impacted, but if you look at what's been happening theatrically, particularly in India, pre-lockdown, you know, a big film would be one that has done like 200, 300 crore of business. And I can do this in USD if you like, or is it okay to do INR?
no, yeah, INR is fine. Yeah.
INR is fine, okay. And post-lockdown, of course, the theaters were among the last businesses to open, right? Because they involved crowds. And once theaters opened and people started trickling back into cinemas, not all films did well, and especially high concept films that used to do better pre-lockdown were tending to do lesser business than they did before the lockdown. However, pre-lockdown, the bigger films would be the ones that did 200 and 300 crore of business. But now, the films that are doing well are doing 500, 600, and Pushpa, for example, has done about 1,000 crore of business. So what has happened is that the ceiling has risen, and to some extent the floor has fallen out, because smaller films, I think people are tending to watch at home, and bigger films, which are theatrical experiences, people are signing up for in large numbers and larger numbers than before. So to answer your question, maybe a shadow has been cast on a certain kind of film, but those films are still finding a platform and they're still seeing the light of day. And as far as people performing algorithmically is concerned, if I can answer this on two levels, what is happening is that a lot of people and a lot of shows are sort of starting life on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube and making their way to Netflix and Prime Video and Disney Plus, Hotstar, and so on and so forth, because they are creators who perform algorithmically, so to speak, right? Because you can measure their performance on each of these social media. At the same time, some of the world's biggest stars, like George Clooney, have no social media presence. So I think we are moving into a new world. I don't think anybody is really getting wiped out. And with a little bit of adaptability, I think you are able to find new avenues. Adaptability is the key.
Okay. So what you're saying is that the types of films that used to perform earlier in theater have changed online.
That's right. It's not completely binary. Some small films are performing in theaters.
Yeah.
But as a trend, you are seeing the smaller films tending to not perform well in theaters, which however doesn't mean they're not getting made.
Okay. So moving on to production tech, like virtual sets, LED volumes, remote editing, shoots have become faster and more controlled. But in that shift, I wonder about the people who are the soul of physical shoots, like location scouts, ground crews, artisans, makeup teams. So as everything becomes engineered and virtual, what happens to the crafts and instincts that came from real world shooting? And how do we bring those people forward instead of letting them fade?
So So maybe some technicians will need to adapt to a new world, but the life of a makeup artist, for example, won't change, right? Because you'll still have to do makeup unless the talent is all virtual, which is some distance away. I don't see, and we can touch upon that separately. It's not like all talent will be virtual and all films will just be virtually made by by machines. So yes, some technicians might get displaced on the shooting floor, but they might be able to find other avenues within filming. I'm not saying that that somebody who's a technician on the floor today has to take up a catering job tomorrow. That is just to put sort of food on the table. But somebody who's working on movie sets today may be able to find a job with maybe a YouTube production. So in my earlier answer, I told you, for example, a lot of creators are, finding an outlet going from social media to the big screen. Some technicians might be able to travel in the reverse, and they may be able to, so somebody who worked on one film a year may be able to do sort of 10 to 15 pieces of or more of YouTube content and still be able to have a job.
What I'm hearing is some of talent does get replaced, but they'll have to adapt to a new world. You mentioned earlier like how it's not a complete shift to virtual talent yet. So one point I wanted to bring up was how AI is creating actors now. So for example, Hollywood strike basically said that you can scan me once and use me forever. And some people who might especially be hit by this is background actors, junior talent, extras, and newcomers trying to break in. So when AI can start generating a performer, what happens to the people whose thousands of people whose careers start in the entry level spaces? And how do we stop automation from wiping out those careers that start at the bottom of the pyramid?
On this, Riya, I have a slightly different take, and we'll start with the top of the pyramid first, okay, and then address the entry level. But when color printers first came about, okay, and this was maybe 30 years ago, right? When color printers first came about, one of the things people said was, you can now print the Mona Lisa in your office or your house, right? It was a big novelty that you can take a color printout and you can print the Mona Lisa. So everybody is able to print the Mona Lisa. And
Yeah.
it sounded very exciting, okay? But, when copies of something are easily available, the original tends to increase in value. So when everybody can print the Mona Lisa at home or in office, the number of visitors at the Louvre in Paris to see the original Mona Lisa has not dropped. It has in fact increased. But this is a top of the pyramid answer, okay? That if somebody can do impressions of George Clooney, Scarlett Johansson, right? Sydney Sweeney, whatever, right? The original only increases in value. People have an appetite to see the original more than the copies. Secondly, in terms of legislation, supposing there is an actor, Natalie Portman, is doing, say, The Black Swan. It's a movie, The Black Swan, where they've taken an, AI impression of her. The Black Swan makers have the rights only pertaining to that character. They can't make a whole new movie with her without compensating her. That's how the rights work. That they may be able to do Black Swan 2, for which also there will be some paperwork and permissions needed from her and compensation to her. But they can't suddenly put a copy of her in the next Avengers movie because they had made a copy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But all of these answers pertain to the top of the pyramid. Okay. As far as bottom of the pyramid is concerned, yes, like in a crowd scene, for example, you may be able to now not engage a lot of daily wage actors and do a real crowd. You may actually do it completely digitally. And some of that is happening even pre AI. A lot of these crowd scenes, for example, if you're doing a war scene in a war movie, a lot of the soldiers in that war are digitally generated even before AI for special effects films, right? and to some extent those people will be hit, but they are daily wagers, and it's very likely that they don't get acting jobs every day and they have another job. So some of that talent could get displaced. In percentage terms, it is not a significant amount of talent. In the arts, yeah, I would say that while while a shadow may be cast by something new, okay, the arts will always find a way to look for the light,
Mhm.
right? So I'm not saying a shadow won't be cast, but I'm saying the arts will find a way to look for the light.
Okay. So what you're saying is like in the case of arts, like AI might not necessarily replace star actors or writers, but it might like the hit could land at assistant writers, juniors, and like junior roles, but not as like much.
Correct.
Okay.
So technicians may be affected more than artists.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of the technicians, especially in the film business, tend to be multi-skilled, so they will find a way to reskill.
Yeah, so like now it seems like there have been more influencers brought into the acting and film industry because of because of the built-in audiences that they're bringing in. So how do you think we can like keep the opportunities for maybe traditionally trained actors while keeping space for also the growth of the industry?
So traditionally trained actors will come out of acting academies, and those academies anyway have a system for discovery of that talent. Social media became an additional outlet for people who didn't have access to those academies.
Mhm.
And everything will coexist. There was a in the 80s there was a song called Video Killed the Radio Star. Okay. And the music video for this song was the first ever music video on MTV. The first ever music video. Now, theoretically, Video Killed the Radio Star, but I'm saying this was a song from the 80s, right? So maybe like 40, 45 years ago. 45 years later, radio is still around,
Mhm.
and it has taken different forms, satellite radio and different shape and form, but radio is still around. And no less a person than the Prime Minister of India uses the radio for a show called Man Ki Baat to reach mass pockets of India. So he does a monthly radio show called Man Ki Baat, which reaches the remotest parts of India. And the leader of the country is using that platform. So radio is still around. Video is also very much still around. In fact, video, which in the 80s existed on a medium called VHS, which was the delivery mechanism for video, has then evolved to laser discs and then video discs, and then it evolved to streaming, which is the current form of delivery. Okay. But video also exists and radio also exists. So eventually it's not an either or situation. It's like when food delivery platforms came in, people said, what will happen to the restaurant business? But the fact is that restaurants are doing better because they are able to sell more food without adding more tables,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So I think eventually after an initial phase of disruption, we will find that both these can be used to coexist, because I think you can use technology to sort of make a certain manual process more efficient, but you cannot really use it to create art.
Yeah. One other point I wanted to go into was about deepfake. So how like in the deepfake world, it's honestly becoming scary how faces are being used in ads, political videos, and synthetic films without consent. And some people that might be most at risk is older actors or actors without legal literacy. So what do you think this representation means when your face can be on the screen without you? And how do agencies protect talent from the misuse of their digital selves?
So, deep fakes are not just a film industry problem, and fake news is not just a film industry problem. These are very, very deep societal challenges, and there is a lot to protect you, because whether you are a celebrity or whether you are, a common person whose identity has been stolen, the fact is that your identity belongs to you,
Mhm.
right? And you have legal recourse. Whether you are legally literate or not is a secondary thing. you have legal recourse to make sure that your identity cannot be used without your permission. So their regulation and law will come in. It's early days, and it's not something that pertains only to the film industry.
Okay. So staying on like the idea of agencies kind of in film. So agencies are evolving very fast, like being AI aware, digital first and platform savvy. But even in that evolution, like some people that might be left behind could be actors without digital presence, older actors or newcomers and niche talent. So as agencies become more tech driven, what responsibility do you think they hold for the people who can't keep up?
One of the things that not just agencies but the industry can do is to just help people to reskill, because
Mhm.
because at the core of this is skilling, right? So a human skill can be performed better by a machine. In that case, one of the things that the human can do is to upskill or reskill, or learn to use that machine to improve that skill. So it may not be a completely binary situation in as far as the arts go.
Okay. Oh, so as you mentioned, there's obviously both high positives and negatives to AI or just the evolution of the film industry. So, my final question for you is between AI generated actors, synthetic influencers, data led casting, engineered production, the industry is reinventing itself at a speed that humans can't necessarily match. So, in that world, what are you most worried about getting left behind? And what do you think it'll take to make sure that tech doesn't erase people who gave this industry its soul?
So deep down, whether it is movies or music, there is an element of magic in them deep down.
Mhm.
And while you may, like I said, make some of the manual processes like subtitling or dubbing a little more efficient, okay, the fact of writing a beautiful story and then telling it beautifully on screen, there is an element of magic which will never be replaced. If it was possible to make films on a formula, then all films would have been successful. So what happens is that people say, okay, this film has been successful, superheroes, right? So let's just make superhero films and we'll make a lot of money. But the fact is that not all superhero films work. If romances work, then every romance would have worked. But that is also not the case. You have some romances that haven't worked. So on and so forth for comedy, horror, all of these. You take any genre. So the fact is that there is an element of the unknown as far as films are concerned. And for that reason, there will always be an aura around them, a magic around them, which no machine can ever replace.
Okay. Vivek, thank you so much. This was really helpful. What we've learned is that shadows can look different in every industry. In entertainment, the initial shadow often softens because the industry is actively working to ensure that artists and technicians aren't left behind, whether through reskilling, retraining, or shifting them into new roles. And because this industry is ultimately driven by art, emotion, and human magic, even when technology disrupts parts of the workflow, the creative essence people bring can't be displaced. And to everyone listening, progress is amazing, but it often casts a shadow. Our job is to make sure that people don't disappear inside that. See you next time on Shadows of Progress.